They told me I'd inherited $78 million. And in the same breath, I learned my wife had been sleeping with my brother. My name is Daniel Carter. I turned 57 last spring, and I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Nothing prepares you for the double strike of a lawyer's letter and the truth hiding behind it. The money came from my uncle Raymond, an oil man who'd left Texas years ago to bake in the Miami sun, where he traded derricks for high-rises and cigars. Everyone thought he'd cut me out of his will long ago. Truth was, Raymond didn't trust many people. He trusted me least of all, or so I'd believed. Yet there it was in black and white. Every cent of his empire was mine. But the letter held more than numbers. Tucked inside was a second envelope, sealed in red wax, with my name scratched in his furious handwriting. And in that letter, Raymond spelled it out. The inheritance wasn't just wealth. It was proof. Proof that my wife, Claire, and my younger brother, Thomas, had been circling me for years, waiting for Raymond to die, waiting for me to fall. He called them traitors with polished smiles. I read the words 3 times, my hands shaking. The ocean breeze through Raymond's penthouse windows, suddenly cold as steel. 78 million. A fortune bigger than anything I'd dreamed. But tied to it was a betrayal I couldn't ignore. That night, I confronted Claire. She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. She just looked at me with eyes that had gone hard and distant. "You weren't supposed to find out this way," she said. Raymond always liked his little games. Some of various. Her voice was calm, almost pitying. And for the first time in 30 years, I realized my marriage had been nothing more than a mask. Now, the mask was gone. And all I had left was money, rage, and the knowledge that both could kill me if I let them. I didn't sleep that night. Not with the letter burning in my mind. Not with Claire's calm confession echoing like a death knell. By dawn, I'd poured 3 glasses of bourbon and stared at the Miami skyline until the sun turned the towers gold. $78 million. It sat like a loaded gun in the lawyer's account, waiting for me to claim it. But the truth was, I couldn't even claim myself. By mid-morning, I was at the office of Raymond's attorney, a sharp man named Alvarez, with skin tanned like mahogany and eyes that gave nothing away. His suit was flawless, his voice smoother than the ocean outside. "You understand, Mr. Carter," he said, sliding papers across the desk. "This inheritance isn't simply cash. It's holdings, properties, stocks, offshore accounts, assets worth $78 million, perhaps more, depending on the market. And debts?" I asked, my voice rough. Alvarez tilted his head. "Not debts. Enemies, perhaps. Raymond made them the way some men collect art. You should know, this money paints a target on your back." I almost laughed. Back? It was my front I worried about. Now my brother's smile. My wife's silence. As I signed the first document, Alvarez's assistant entered with a folder. She set it in front of me. A second will. My uncle's handwriting on the cover, scrawled and furious. "Raymond left. Conditions," Alvarez explained carefully. "This document isn't binding, but he wanted you to read it." I opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Claire and Thomas together on Raymond's yacht. Dates scribbled in the margin. Some photos were years old, others were recent. Too recent. Bile rose in my throat. I shoved the photos back into the folder. Alvarez watched me quietly. "Mr. Carter, if I may offer advice, money magnifies everything. Betrayal, greed, loyalty. Whatever path you take with this inheritance, it will not end quietly." I signed the final page with a hand that barely felt steady. $78 million was mine. But so was the war that came with it. I didn't have to wait long to face Thomas. That evening, as the Miami sky bruised purple over Biscayne Bay, he showed up unannounced at Raymond's penthouse. I found him leaning against the marble bar, pouring himself a drink like he owned the place. "Hell of a view, isn't it?" he said, raising his glass. His grin was casual, practiced. The same grin he'd used to borrow money, steal deals, and charm women, including, apparently, my wife. Cut the act, I said. My voice came out colder than I intended, I know. Thomas's grin twitched, but didn't vanish. Know what, brother? I tossed the folder onto the bar. The photos spilled across the marble. Claire's face, his hand on her waist. My stomach twisted, but my anger kept me steady. His eyes flicked down. For a heartbeat, silence. Then he chuckled, slow and low. Raymond, that bastard always loved games. You're really gonna take his word from the grave? Don't lie to me. My fists clenched. Thomas downed his drink in one swallow, then leaned closer. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Fine. It's true. Claire and we were together. But you think that's the real betrayal? My jaw tightened. Enlighten me, he smirked, tapping the photo with one finger. This? This was just comfort. The real betrayal, Danny, is that you inherited $78 million that doesn't belong to you. Raymond promised me a cut. Half. He said you'd never see a dime. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking like stone. Now, Thomas continued, pouring himself another drink as if nothing had changed, we can settle this two ways. You share the inheritance 50-50. Or we tear each other apart until there's nothing left but lawyers and blood. Your call. My heart hammered. I thought betrayal ended with Claire. But now I understood Raymond's fortune wasn't just money. It was a fuse. And Thomas had already lit the match. I stared at Thomas across the bar, his smirk gleaming in the glass and marble like a stain that wouldn't wash out. 50-50, he said, like it was a business deal instead of a knife in my back. I forced a slow breath and unclenched my fists. If Raymond had taught me anything, it was this. Men like Thomas thrived on impulse. You didn't beat them by rage. You beat them by patience. So I smiled. Thin, controlled. You're right. Lawyers would tear this apart for years. I'll give you your half. Thomas blinked once, surprised. He hadn't expected me to fold so easily. But then his grin widened. Smart. I knew you'd see sense. Raymond always underestimated you, Danny. Aid buyin'. I poured myself a drink, raised the glass, and clinked it against his. To family, I said, the words bitter in my throat. He swallowed his whiskey and slapped me on the back. Like we were kids again. We'll make this work. I've got contacts, investments ready to go. You'll see we'll turn 78 into 100 before the year's out. I nodded, but inside, my mind was racing. Because I hadn't lied when I said I'd give him half. I just hadn't said which half. Raymond's assets weren't just stocks and accounts. They were buildings, ships, land deals across Miami and beyond. Some worth fortunes, others little more than debts waiting to collapse. If Thomas wanted in, I'd give him the half that would sink him like a stone. As he rambled on about plans, I studied him. The lines around his eyes, the way he tapped his glass when he thought he was winning. The same little brother who once stole my bike, my dates, and now my wife. Let him think he'd stolen my fortune too. Because while Thomas saw himself as the wolf finally taking what was his, I was already mapping the trap. And when it closed, he wouldn't just lose the money. He'd lose everything. Thomas always talked too much when he thought he'd won. That night, he poured himself another drink and went on about joint ventures and global opportunities like he was pitching to Wall Street. I just listened, nodding at the right times, letting him believe I'd rolled over. But in my head, the pieces were already moving. Raymond hadn't built his empire on oil alone. He'd spread it into real estate, shipping, and risky offshore investments. Half of it was gold. The other half was a snake pit. I remembered Alvarez, the lawyer, warning me, assets worth millions, depending on the market. Some of them were already bleeding. So I decided I'd give Thomas exactly what he wanted, a share of the empire, but it would be the poisoned half, the side that looked rich on paper but carried hidden debts, lawsuits, and sharks circling in the water. When the storm hit, and it would, he'd drown under it. You'll handle the negotiations, right? Thomas said, slurring slightly as he lifted his glass. You always were the boring one with the paperwork. I'll handle the vision. I forced a smile. Of course. You'll get your half-brother. I'll make sure the paperwork reflects that. He grinned, satisfied, and clinked his glass against mine again. Knew you'd come around. Claire always said you were stubborn, but reasonable when cornered. Her name cut through me like a blade. I kept my face steady, but inside, my anger sharpened. Claire wasn't just his lover, she was his ally, which meant when Thomas went down, she'd go with him. By midnight, he stumbled out of the penthouse, humming to himself like a man already rich. I stayed behind, staring at the Miami skyline. $78 million sat in my hands, but revenge, that was priceless. And if Raymond's last gift to me was betrayal, then I'd honor it with the only inheritance my brother deserved: ruin. I didn't get far with my plan before Claire made her move. 2 days later, I came back to the penthouse from Alvarez's office, papers in hand, only to find her waiting in the living room. She was barefoot, a glass of wine in her hand, wearing the silk robe I'd bought her years ago in Paris. For a moment, she looked like the woman I once believed she was. Then she spoke. "I know what you're doing, Daniel." My chest tightened, but I kept my face unreadable. "And what's that?" She swirled the wine lazily, her eyes sharp as glass. "You think you can hand Thomas the scraps and walk away clean? You're underestimating him. You always have. And you're underestimating me." I set the folder of documents on the counter, slow, deliberate. "You two deserve each other." Her smile was thin, cruel. "Don't be naive. Thomas isn't a partner. He's a weapon. And I'm the one who knows how to aim him." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I forced calm. "So what do you want, Claire? Money? More lies?" She set down her glass and stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I want control. Of everything. Raymond's fortune, the assets, the name. You were always the safe one, the steady one. But safety doesn't win empires, Daniel. Power does." I laughed once, bitter. "And you think you'll get it through him?" Her lips brushed my ear as she whispered, "Through both of you. Unless you're smart enough to choose me." The robe brushed my arm as she pulled away, leaving me with the scent of her perfume and the echo of her words. My stomach turned. Thomas thought he was playing me. Claire thought she was playing us both. But the truth was clear now. Raymond's inheritance wasn't money. It was a battlefield. And if I didn't make my next move fast, I'd lose everything. I let her words hang in the air, her perfume still clinging to me like smoke. Claire was watching, waiting, certain I'd flinch. I didn't. Instead, I gave her the smallest smile, the kind that once made her lean closer. "You're right," I said softly. "Thomas is reckless. Always has been. And you've always been sharper." Her eyes flickered, surprise first, then satisfaction. She thought she'd won. She thought I was folding, just like Thomas had. "Good," she whispered, brushing her hand against mine. "Then we can build this together. Let him believe he's in control, while we hold the reins." I nodded, but my thoughts were racing. She wanted me as her shield, her puppet, her insurance policy against Thomas's chaos. But Raymond hadn't raised me to be anyone's shield. He raised me to survive. That night, after she went upstairs, I stayed in the study and spread the documents across the desk. Raymond's estate was a labyrinth: shell companies, offshore accounts, properties with ownership buried under layers of legal smokescreen. Thomas thought wealth was a check you cashed. Claire thought power was a bed you warmed. But Raymond, he built traps inside his fortune. And I had the key. By dawn, I'd drafted the outlines of a plan. I'd give Thomas exactly what he wanted: assets that looked unstoppable, but carried lawsuits, debts, and federal investigations just waiting to be triggered. And I'd let Claire believe she'd seduced me back into her circle. But in truth, I wasn't choosing Thomas. I wasn't choosing Claire. I was choosing neither. I was choosing revenge. The pen scratched across the page as I drew the first lines of their downfall. And for the first time since Raymond's death, I felt alive. They wanted a war? I'd give them one. I chose the quieter weapon paper. Wars fought in boardrooms leave no bodies on the floor, but they kill reputations, fortunes, and futures just as surely. And Thomas and Claire were walking straight into mine. By day, I worked with Alvarez, Raymond's lawyer, combing through assets with surgical precision. I shifted properties into shell corporations, reassigned debts, and packaged the worst of Raymond's liabilities into a bundle that gleamed like treasure. Offshore shipping lines with unpaid tariffs, a real estate project on the verge of collapse, a company under quiet investigation for laundering. On paper, it looked like a gold mine. In reality, it was a sinkhole waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to claim it. By night, I played my role. Claire hovered close, whispering plans about our empire, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her voice dripping with confidence. I nodded at the right times, feigned interest, let her believe her seduction was working. And with Thomas, it was easier. He bragged over dinners, slapping me on the back, talking about how he'd finally step out from my shadow. "We'll split it clean, brother," he said, raising his glass. "Half and half, just like we agreed." I smiled back, even as I slid another document across the table for him to sign. His pen scratched without hesitation. Piece by piece, the trap closed. 2 weeks later, Alvarez called me into his office. "It's done," he said simply, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your brother is now the proud owner of liabilities that could sink a senator." Claire signed her part as well. "They're in this together." I opened the folder. Inside were the final signatures. Their signatures, for the first time in years. I allowed myself a real smile. $78 million hadn't just made me rich, it had given me justice. But justice, I realized, as I closed the folder, was only the first step, because Thomas and Claire didn't know they were already standing on the edge of the cliff, and I was about to give them the push. I chose silence first. Let them dance on the edge of the cliff, blind to how far they'd fall. For the next week, Thomas strutted through Miami like a man-crowned king. He hosted dinners on Raymond's yacht, shaking hands with bankers and developers, boasting about the empire he'd just secured. Claire was always at his side, draped in diamonds, whispering in his ear, playing the part of queen. I watched from the shadows. I even attended one of their parties, glass in hand, listening as Thomas toasted to family unity. The irony almost choked me. But the truth was, my plan needed time. The lawsuits, the audits, the unpaid tariffs, they were all dominoes lined up neatly. One push, and they'd topple. But it had to be the right moment. Too early, and they'd wriggle free. Too late, and suspicion might turn back on me. One night, Claire cornered me on the balcony, the city lights glittering on her skin. "You're quiet, Daniel," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Thomas may believe this game is his, but I know you better. What are you hiding?" I met her gaze and forced a smile. "I've just been thinking about Raymond, about how proud he'd be, seeing us together." She studied me, suspicion flickering, but pride won out. She leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear. "Then think about this. When Thomas burns out, it'll be you and me left holding everything." I let her believe it. I let her kiss my cheek and walk back inside, glowing like she'd already won. But the very next morning, the first domino tipped. Alvarez called. A federal inquiry into the shipping company Thomas had inherited. A fine in the millions. Investigators circling like sharks. I poured myself a bourbon, sunlight spilling into the penthouse, and smiled. The fire had been lit, and Thomas didn't even smell the smoke yet. The first crack appeared in Thomas's perfect grin. It was a Tuesday morning when he stormed into the penthouse, tie loosened, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch before even looking at me. "They're hitting me with fines," he barked. "Millions. Some nonsense about unpaid tariffs. Alvarez says it'll blow over. But these bastards don't let go once they smell blood." I sat back in the leather chair, calm, measured. Tariffs can be complicated. Raymond's accounts were messy. Messy? Thomas slammed his glass down, amber spilling across the counter. You told me these assets were clean. I raised an eyebrow. No, brother. I told you they were yours. He stared at me, eyes narrowing. For a moment I wondered if he saw the truth, but then Claire swept in, silk robe flowing, and touched his arm. Don't lose your temper, she cooed. It's just paperwork. You'll fix it, Thomas. You always do. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and calculating, like she knew there was more beneath the surface but couldn't yet prove it. Thomas paced, muttering about lawyers and accountants, before finally sinking onto the couch with his head in his hands. 78 million, he whispered, and I'm already bleeding it dry. I poured him another drink, set it on the table, and clapped his shoulder. That's the thing about inheritances. Sometimes they're heavier than you expect. He didn't answer, just drank. Claire's gaze lingered on me, long and cold, before she slid down beside him, whispering comfort into his ear. I turned away, hiding my smile. The trap was working, and this was only the first tremor. The real quake was still coming. The second bomb landed harder than the first. 3 days later, Thomas barged into Alvarez's office during a meeting I'd arranged. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he waved a stack of papers like they were burning him. This is fraud, he shouted, slamming the papers onto Alvarez's desk. The real estate, trust those condos in Brickell, half the units don't even exist. The city's calling it a shell project. Investors want blood. My blood. Alvarez adjusted his glasses, unflinching. Mr. Carter, the contracts are in your name. The liabilities transferred legally, unless you can prove coercion. He let the sentence die, with a shrug. Thomas spun toward me, fury in his eyes. You knew about this, didn't you? I kept my tone calm, almost bored. We both signed the paperwork, brother. You were too busy celebrating to read the fine print. When now for then, Tan started in maim of the bed in many. For a second, I thought he might lunge at me. His fists clenched, his jaw worked, but then Claire's hand touched his arm. She'd followed him in, silent as a shadow. Don't, she whispered, her voice like silk over steel. That's exactly what he wants. Her eyes cut to me, sharp, suspicious. Unlike Thomas, she wasn't blinded by pride. She was studying me, piecing it together. Daniel's always been patient, she said softly, as though speaking only to him. He doesn't need to shout or fight. He waits, and then he strikes where no one sees it coming. I met her stare without blinking. Careful, Claire. Paranoia doesn't suit you. But the truth was clear in her gaze. She saw through me. Maybe not all the way. Not yet, but enough to know I wasn't the fool Thomas believed. Thomas, meanwhile, poured himself another drink with shaking hands. If I go down over this, Daniel, I'll take you with me. I swear it. I leaned back, calm as ever, even as my pulse hammered. Then you'd better swim fast, brother, because the water's only getting deeper. It was Claire who moved first. That evening, while Thomas drowned himself in whiskey and denial, she came to me. No pretense this time, no silk robes, no perfume masking her intent. She found me in Raymond's study, where the city glowed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and shut the door behind her. You're destroying him, she said flatly. I looked up from the ledger in front of me, feigning innocence. Thomas? He's doing a fine job of that on his own. She stepped closer, eyes hard. Don't play games with me, Daniel. I've watched you for 30 years. You never move without a plan. This, she waved toward the papers, toward the empire. Raymond left. This is too neat, too exact. You set him up to take the fall. Her words were a blade, sharp and true. I didn't bother denying it. Instead, I leaned back in the leather chair, folding my hands. And if I did, she hesitated, just a breath, before her expression shifted, calculating. Then I want in. That caught me. For all her betrayals, all her venom, I hadn't expected her to say it so bluntly. You're tired of Thomas, I said slowly. She gave a humorless laugh. Thomas is a child playing king. He'll drag us all under if someone doesn't cut the rope. You've set the noose around his neck already. Let me help you tighten it, and when he falls, we split what's left. I studied her. The woman who had broken me, betrayed me, now asking to join me in finishing the man she'd betrayed me with. Why would I ever trust you again? I asked. Her eyes flicked to the city lights. Because I hate losing more than I love anyone. And Daniel, without me, he'll sense it's you. With me, he'll never see it coming. Silence stretched between us, thick and dangerous. She was offering herself not as a wife, not even as a lover, but as a weapon. And I had to decide whether to wield her or cut her down with Thomas. I let the silence hang just long enough for Claire to wonder which way I'd fall. Then I gave her the same small smile I'd once used when she thought she'd won an argument. Fine, I said. We do it together. Her shoulders eased, but only slightly. She didn't trust me any more than I trusted her. That was the irony. Two liars, circling each other, agreeing to share a knife. She leaned over the desk, her perfume faint but unmistakable. Good, because Thomas is circling the drain. He's already talking about selling off assets to cover those fines. If he does that, the sharks will smell blood, and we'll lose control of the narrative. I nodded, sliding a ledger toward her. Then we make sure he sells exactly what we want him to sell. Her eyes lit briefly with something dark ambition. Hunger. The same fire that had once drawn me to her and now repulsed me. But I played along. For the next hour, we laid out a strategy. On the surface, it was about salvaging the Carter name, stabilizing the estate, protecting what Raymond had built. Underneath, it was the quiet architecture of betrayal, pushing Thomas toward the poisoned deals, isolating him until the walls collapsed on top of him. At the end of it, she touched my hand light, deliberate. I knew you'd come around, she whispered. I didn't move it away. But when she left, closing the study door behind her, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Because she was right about one thing. Thomas was circling the drain. But what she didn't know was that I had no intention of sharing anything with her when he finally went under. Claire believed she'd found her new partner. In truth, she'd just volunteered to be my next victim. Thomas made his move before Claire could make hers. It was a Friday morning when Alvarez called me, his voice clipped but laced with amusement. Your brother has just sold off one of Raymond's shipping lines. For pennies. To a private buyer he barely vetted. I don't think he realizes what he stepped into. I felt the smile tug at my lips before I could stop it. How bad? Bad enough, Alvarez said. The company is tied up in federal scrutiny. By selling it, Thomas effectively inherited every liability personally. If the investigation deepens, it won't stop at his assets. It will reach into his name, into his life. I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself a coffee. Through the penthouse glass, Miami glittered under the sun, as careless and cruel as ever. That afternoon, Thomas stormed into the penthouse again. This time, his swagger was gone. His shirt clung with sweat, his eyes bloodshot. They're saying I'm on the hook for millions, he shouted. You knew about this, didn't you? You set me up. I stayed calm, sipping my coffee. You signed the papers, Thomas. You wanted the glory. Glory comes with risk. He slammed his fists onto the table. Don't play me, Daniel. You think you're smarter, but you're just hiding behind paperwork. I'll find a way out, and when I do, I'll burn you with me. Claire slipped into the room behind him, her face carefully composed. She touched his arm, trying to soothe him, but her eyes darted to mine, sharp, measuring. She knew he was unraveling, and she knew I was the one pulling the threads. Thomas paced the room like a caged animal. If the feds come after me, it won't just be me they ruin, it'll be all of us. The Carter name, the fortune, everything. You'll drown too. I set my cup down, leaned forward, and said evenly, then swim, brother, because the tide doesn't care who it drags under. He froze, staring at me, realization flickering in his eyes. For the first time, I think he truly saw it. The trap wasn't luck. It was design. And Claire, standing behind him, saw it too. Thomas broke first. The federal summons arrived on a humid Monday morning. Alvarez delivered it in person, his voice cool, almost clinical, as he explained that Thomas was now the subject of an active investigation. Fraud, laundering, unpaid tariffs, the works. The shipping line he'd sold had been the spark, and now the fire was roaring. Thomas collapsed into the leather chair across from me, his face gray, his hands trembling. For once there was no arrogance, no smirk, just fear. "They'll take everything," he whispered. "The houses, the cars, the accounts. I'll be ruined." Claire stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. But her eyes were on me, calculating, cold. "This doesn't have to destroy the family," she said smoothly. "Daniel, if you step in, if you shield him, merge the assets again, we can survive this. Together." Her words were honeyed poison, and we both knew it. I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady. "Claire, Thomas made his choices. He wanted half the empire. Now he owns all of its debts." Thomas looked up, desperation raw in his eyes. "You can't let them do this to me. You're my brother." I held his gaze, remembering the photos, the lies, the years of betrayal. Then I said softly, "No, Thomas. You stopped being my brother a long time ago." His face crumpled. Claire's grip tightened on his shoulder, but I saw it then, the subtle shift. She wasn't holding him up. She was holding him down. And when Alvarez confirmed that the assets were untouchable, that Thomas alone bore the weight, Claire didn't flinch. She leaned close to him and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it broke him. He slumped forward, ruined. Later, as Alvarez left and Thomas retreated into the shadows of his own downfall, Claire lingered by the window. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "You played him well," she said. "Almost as well as I played you." I froze. She smiled, slow and sharp. "Don't look so surprised, Daniel. Did you really think you were the only one moving pieces on this board?" In that moment, I realized Raymond's true inheritance wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the game itself. And it wasn't over.